Well, we are right in the middle of pothole season where you see it all. Cars in the shop because a driver hit one. People planting flowers in them. The hole is so deep. Has anyone made a calendar yet with this year's worst roads? Well, a few weeks back, we did have this pothole palooza here on the radio. You might recall our podcast episode of Good Questions Saskatchewan that asked, why do Regina and Saskatoon have so many potholes? Well, the short answer, the weather and our soil, not a great combination. But since that episode, we found out we have some competition.
All hands, brace for impact. It's pothole season. I'm Anis Haydari, and this is Calgary.
There are some sure signs of spring in Montreal. Yes, flowers bloom, birds chirp, restaurants and bars put out their terraces, and right on cue, potholes appear.
So today on the show, Blue Sky, we're battling it out with a few other locations across Canada that seem to be dealing with some disastrous roads too. And as always, you can call us with your pothole report. The number is 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Okay, so before we dip our toes into other people's potholes, I want to start in my city, Saskatoon, where we seem to be dealing with a higher number of potholes this spring. Cam Leclerc is acting roadways manager with the city of Saskatoon.
So we use a pothole app that kind of takes in all the information from the public about where potholes are and the severity and that kind of thing. And we already have as many reports in that app as we would have in a typical entire season. We had a lot of freeze thaw in the late part of the winter, and then we had another late freeze thaw and snowfall in April. And so what that means is we get more moisture on the ground, and that'll freeze up overnight, and then that'll cause a crack or a hole to form. And then over time, as people drive over that, more and more material gets removed, and then we end up with a bigger pothole. It's been very busy for our pothole crews and our pothole contractors, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that we're catching up.
So it is bad here, but it can't be bad everywhere, can it? I find that whenever you start talking to people in Saskatchewan about roads, they tend to look west with envy. There's something about Alberta's pavement. I don't know if it's the weather, the amount of money in their provincial coffers, or all of the above that makes for smooth surfaces in that province. But this year, Calgary is spottier than usual. The producer of the podcast, This is Calgary, joins us right now. Josh Paget, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hello, my friend.
So, I had to laugh. You are originally from Saskatchewan. You know this place well. I figured you moved west for the better roads.
I feel great shame that for years when I looked west from Rosetown, the highway with the Highway 4 and then Highway 8 around Rosetown were, not so great. And once you hit that Alberta spot, around Alsace heading into Hannah, it's beautiful. It's so clear. We always swore that they paved it extra just to rub it in our faces because Saskatchewan highways are so bad. And my sister texted me this morning saying, you can't even see the yellow lines on Highway 4 because of all the craters. Well, we're in Rosetown territory now, Alicia.
What is up? Okay, so what is going on with Calgary this year?
It's a lot of potholes, and it's normally you think it's a feel thing, right? It doesn't feel worse this year. So that was what we were kicking around in the newsroom. It's not just a feel thing. There are actual facts that it is simply a bad year in Calgary. Potholes have come back with a vengeance. What's that Coulter Wall song, Sleeping on the Blacktop? There's no sleeping on this blacktop. This is uncomfortable pavement.
Okay, so but just how bad is it?
So April 1st to the morning of May 31st, we had the most service requests into 311. So you can say, hey, there's a pothole in front of my house, or I noticed a pothole on whatever road, and the city marks it down, and then eventually they go fill it. Well, we had almost 6,300 of those, and that's the most ever for a quarter. And that quarter, Alicia, it ain't done. So it sucks. It's bad. An example, my street, your typical 80s suburban spot, every house looks the same kind of thing. I've got a 29-inch right out front.
29-incher.
She's 3 inches deep. You know, there are little sailboat races on it from the local ant population. And that's just one. There are others on that road, a little potropolis is what I like to call it. But this is pretty typical, and we can't believe it's happened in Calgary. So here's our host, Anise Dari, asking folks if they're seeing the same thing.
Hey, my name is Lindsay, and this happened to me in the southwest of the city. Recently got a newish car to us. It's not new, but new to us. Anyways, driving down a little bit of an incline by a Shell station, there was a ginormous pothole that was not marked. There's a pylon shoved into it. My brand new car into the pothole, and now it sounds like my car is full of a cookie sheet with cutlery on the top of it. And I can't get in to see my mechanic until next week. So here I am driving this horrible sounding vehicle. People look at me as I drive by, all because of this pothole.
Hey, my name is Joe, and a couple weeks ago hit this giant pothole, and it destroyed my winter tire, one of my winter tires.
How did it destroy it? Be more specific, like what broke?
There was this giant bulge on the side of my tire, and if I would have driven my tire, it would have exploded. The mechanic said in the town that I was working in, and they said, if you would have driven this, you would have had a broken tire, and you would have gone off the road and died.
I'm glad that didn't happen.
Me too.
Yeah, like it's ugly here, and like to the city's credit, it sounds like Saskatoon has something similar. We have a map here. You fill out the map, they go fill it, and the city is filling these potholes. It's just that there are so many of them this year.
So what happened in Calgary that made it so bad?
You know, it's a couple of things. One's the short game, one's the long game. So the long game is that our road system's just not what it was. So even 9 years ago, we have a thing here called the Pavement Quality Index, the PQI, if you will, and we were above a 6, pretty good. We're not anymore. So we're below that. Just the overall pavement is lower. Of course, anyone who drives in, to head to the IKEA from Saskatchewan, you know that our city is huge and it sprawls and it costs more and more and more and more to fix everything. So it takes a lot more investment just to maintain the road as it is. The same thing that you guys had, where we had a weird winter where it was a slow, warm winter aside from one cold snap. So that freeze thaw we had was dramatic, and we just had a lot more of it. So here's Chris Hewitt. He's the city's chief pothole filler.
Maybe surprisingly to some people, if you have a really long, cold winter, potholes obviously are often not as much of a problem. What we had this winter was a lot of warmer weather mixed with colder weather, and so you have these freeze-thaw cycles. Water keeps getting into the cracks of the road, freezing up. Does that 20, 30 times over the year, and then come spring, you start to see a lot more potholes than you might be used to. Another challenge this year was that, typically we're out February, March repairing potholes, but this year towards the end of winter we were out dealing with snow almost right up until mid-April.
So really it's this combo of, the whiplash that is Calgary weather, and it was whiplash year.
It's whiplash year.
Such a good word.
Oh, yeah. And we should say, it's not just the city. So, Deerfoot, I feel like Deerfoot's this legendary highway that everyone's heard of, but maybe not. But Deerfoot is that huge road from the south of the province all the way, up to Edmonton. And Deerfoot's maintained by the province. And so this is not the city's problem. And Deerfoot is whoa, mama, rough shape right now. Deerfoot, I've never seen anything like it. They're spending not a bazillion, but millions and millions and millions of dollars to give it a facelift, because Deerfoot, our pride and joy, is also a shake and shocker right now.
Shake and shocker. All because of the whiplashier weather.
Right.
But the whiplashier weather is a thing, because when we were working on our pothole podcast, we talked to an expert who said very similar things to what you're saying, Josh. We've got a lot of roads. We haven't maintained them all that well. He's kind of talking from, big picture, across the country of aging infrastructure. But the other issue is going to be climate change and, extreme weather fluctuations that will likely get worse because of climate change. And if you have those fluctuations, you get more cracks in the road, and that means more potholes. So that was the message that I got in the research. Yeah, great. Hey, so what is your city doing about it, Josh?
Well, it's what we like to do with everything, at least in Alberta, to problems, and we're just throwing money at it. So there's almost another $9 million going in from the snow, because we didn't have much snow, from the snow budget into potholes. So we're spending a bunch more money to fill potholes. They have increased the overall budget as well, just to try to maintain the lower down quality of roads that we do have. But like, Calgary's a drive-in town. You know, we've got all those Saskies who grew up when you turn 16, you get a car. So, you know, you could take the train in Calgary, but you're not going to because you drive. So the pressure is on, because as soon as we've got a year like this year, everybody notices how bad it is.
Where is it worse, though, Josh? Your hometown in Rosetown or Calgary?
Oh, Rosetown, because we never fully paved a road. What we would do as kids is they would pave like a section of the road, and that's where we would do our Papa Wheelies on the new pavement. Because if you went further down the road in front of like Walter Asseltine Elementary, like forget it, because it's just like the road is so bad.
Okay, well, you're welcome to stay with us, because we're going to head to Montreal next, where that podcast host also thinks they've got it really bad. So I don't know who's going to, I mean, I'm winning. Thank you for saying that it's still really bad outside of the city here. But this has been fun, Josh. I thought it was hilarious that separately we were all working on these pothole podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
Like, who knew it was such a thing?
And Alberta always wants to be a little bit like Quebec, but maybe not in this
way.
instance. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Josh, thank you.
You're welcome.
That is Josh Paget, the producer of This is Calgary. We want you to share with us what you're seeing in Saskatchewan. We're getting reports from across the country that it's bad in a lot of places, but tell us what it's like where you live in the province. 1-800-716-2221. You can also email us, bluesky@cbc.ca. We got an email from Helen who writes, just yesterday we heard a gravelly noise while driving. We stopped after a while to see a flat piece of my car dragging under the motor area. It was the shield which had come loose. My garage said it was caused by potholes. $67? It could have been worse. I don't remember a worse spring streetwise. Helen, thank you for emailing. You can too. bluesky@cbc.ca, or give us a call, 1-800-716-2221. So next up, we are going to Montreal. No, not for poutine, but for potholes. Ainsley McClellan is the host of the podcast Good Question Montreal, and she joins us right now. Ainsley, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks so much, Leisha.
Big fan of your podcast. Love it.
Thank you. You too.
Great to have you on the show. So what's up with Montreal's roads? You've got a similar problem with potholes as we do. So what do people say about Montreal's streets?
It's so funny to hear you guys just now, Josh, talking about, who are the winners and losers here. It's kind of hard to tell. I think if we're winning the race, then maybe we're losing it by having so many potholes. I think most people in Montreal would tell you that our roads are not in great shape. Just like to put this in perspective, the question asker for this episode sort of put potholes up there with like poutine, bagels, and the Habs as like symbols of the city of Montreal. And, so that's not that auspicious. But I think, the perception is also quite similar to what you were talking about with Saskatchewan, that you're looking west and seeing sort of smooth sailing as you hit the border. That's something that comes up a lot here. People have this impression that as soon as they drive into Ontario, that the roads are smooth and that they're almost doing that on purpose to us, And I spoke to some people for this episode, at least one in particular, who was telling the story about having hit a pothole and popping 3 tires simultaneously on the same pothole. You can imagine this, right? So pulls off, gets out, goes and waits for a tow truck at a restaurant, and the server at the restaurant said he was at least like the 3rd person to be dinged by the same pothole within a week. So obviously, there are those frustrations that people feel, and the issue is it's not like we're not spending money to fix them in Montreal. In fact, there are some indications that we're actually spending more per kilometer. I was looking at this report from the Municipal Benchmarking Association, which sort of looks at different municipalities and how much they're spending, and that Montreal was spending double what most other municipalities were, about $24,000 per kilometer to maintain its paved roads. And so there is this kind of sense of frustration, I think, with a lot of Montrealers that we're putting a lot of money into it, and that we're not necessarily seeing the results in terms of reducing the number of potholes that we have.
So what's going on? Who did you speak to get some answers about this?
Well, we took a look at some of these questions that people have about whether it's a problem, say, for example, with the materials that we're using. So I spoke with Alan Carter, who is the head of the lab on material and pavement at the École de Technologie Supérieure, which is a university in Montreal, specializing in engineering, and he's sort of the asphalt guy. And so we talked about some of the different factors that might contribute to Montreal's potholes being so bad. I mean, we talked about the fluctuating weather. That's certainly something that we have in Montreal. And in fact, this past winter, we did have a lot more freeze-thaw cycles, and so you do end up with worse cracks because of that. I think there was a period between the end of December and the beginning of January where over a 3-week period, we had about 700 calls for potholes just in those 3 weeks, right? But he says it's not necessarily just that, because of course there are other parts of the world where we have conditions that are just as bad as that. But he says there's also often the suggestion that we're not using the right mix of asphalt. He doesn't believe that that's the case. He says, if you stack it up against what's used, say, for example, throughout most of the United States, that it is just as good. It might be a different mix because we have to deal with that larger range of fluctuating temperatures. But to him, that's not so much of a factor, though I should say that there was this report from the Inspector General in Montreal a couple of years ago, I think it was in 2018, that found that there were some contractors who were found to sort of not meet those standards in terms of the materials that they were using, that there was some corner cutting when it came to the road paving, that maybe they were paving over and not fixing the cracks underneath or not fixing the potholes underneath and sort of just paving over the top. But Alan Carter actually pointed to some other factors which are pretty interesting. He believes that the biggest factor is that over the decades we just haven't done the type of deep work to fix the lower levels of the pavement that we need to do, that we've been focusing too much on doing those surface repairs. And the problem is, if you're just fixing the surface repairs, he says, a lot of these cracks are actually not starting at the surface. They're starting much lower down in the structure. And those cracks can migrate up towards the surface, a couple of inches every year. And so if you do a surface repair, maybe it's only going to fix it for a year or 2 years tops, right? So he says because of that, our infrastructure deficit is so large that it's hard to keep up with the amount of work that needs to be done. And, if you do compare Quebec to some other provinces, the CAA, for example, they put out this report in 2020 that was looking at how much do bad roads cost drivers. Well, for example, Quebec, it was found that it was about twice the average amount of money as other provinces. So say $250 a year that drivers were spending just because of pothole damage or the extra fuel that they were using to, stop and go when they were coming up to potholes. So it's costing drivers more. It's costing us more to fix because we're constantly doing these surface repairs. And he says, really, if we want to fix this problem in the long term, we might have to rethink how we approach fixing roads altogether. Let's hear a little bit of our conversation.
If we look at the population of Canada, there's some cities in the world that have more people than we have in the full country. If you take the kilometers of road divided by the number of persons, okay, the equation doesn't work. If you take that and you separate that by provinces, okay, in Quebec, we're not winning this. We have way too many roads, way too many kilometers and everything for the number of people.
So in other words, we don't have enough people to generate enough taxes to pay for all of the maintenance that our roads need. And Alan Carter suggests that fundamentally we may have to make some big changes to the way that we do things. First, he thinks we have to think about the wear and tear that we're putting on our roads.
As a society, it was decided in Canada, I don't know exactly which year, that transportation would go on the roads, not on the train. That was probably one of the worst decisions ever, right? You have a traffic jam, and let's say that you have 10%, heavy trucks, semi-trailer and stuff like that. You could get rid of the 90% of the light cars, right? The roads will be destroyed anyway, because those guys, the 10%, do more damage.
The American Trucking Associations have argued that properly designed roads will not be damaged by the loads they've been built to carry. But we do know that a lot of our roads are already damaged and aging. I asked Alan Carter, could we replace them with something like an airport tarmac that's designed to carry a heavy load?
We could. There's actually no issues with that. Okay? It's a money issue. You have something called perpetual pavement. The name is a little bit weird because it's not perpetual, right? But to be considered a perpetual pavement, it means that you have to last at least 35 years before you need to come back and do something to the structure of the pavement. So during those at least 35 years, you will have just changed the surface layer.
Generally speaking, the layers of these roads are designed to prevent deep cracks from migrating up and to prevent rutting on the surface from penetrating down.
There's a bunch of roads that are made like that. Okay? In Canada, there's a few. In Ontario, there's a little bit more than in Quebec. In the States, it's more popular. In Europe, there's a lot. But it's something that you have to think ahead of time.
And it's something that costs more up front. Another solution goes in the opposite direction, and it's one that would be a hard sell for many communities. Alan Carter says it's possible that we have to consider whether we need all of our roads everywhere to be paved.
There's a few researchers in a few states, a few provinces, and a few countries that they started looking at deconstruction of roads. One of the approach is actually to go back to type of gravel road. And we're able to do now gravel road that do not do dust or something like that. There's some cohesion that is meant on the material. We can do that without heat and everything, so better for the environment. And actually to try to convince people that if it's not black, it's okay. It can do the job. Maybe you'll have to drive slower. That's not such a bad thing.
Ainsley,
Alicia, I think, that's listening to Alan Carter there, I can imagine that a lot of people would hear that and that would be a really tough sell for a lot of towns, right? Because as he suggests, paved roads, they've kind of become associated with, being a sign of prosperity, of modernity. If you think about, industries that rely on using those roads, it would be tough to say, okay, well, we can't afford to do this anymore. But, what he's suggesting there is that perhaps we've created ourselves these large networks of paved roads, and we haven't really allocated the budgets to deal with them. And I know that's something you've talked about in Saskatchewan, that Saskatchewan is a province that has a very large road network, right? So these are some of the challenges that municipalities and provinces are going to be facing, particularly, as you mentioned, with climate change going forward, where you are going to have those freeze-thaw cycles, and it's going to be hard on the roads.
Ainsley, when I was listening to your podcast the first time around, I was running on the treadmill and hearing Alan talk about gravel roads, and I was like, oh my goodness, my mind was kind of blowing. He gave me a lot to think about, but I was thinking of our listeners and how they might respond to that. So now here's their chance. Ainsley, that was really interesting. I don't know. I think you kind of won me over. I think it's pretty bad in Montreal. So
look, I will say just in our favor. There's some of the latest numbers that came out that indicate that on paper, Montreal is making some headway when it comes to the main arteries. Side streets are a different story. We have some that are getting better, some that are getting much worse. But, compared to, say, 10, 15 years ago, our arteries are looking a little bit better. But, yes, still a huge deficit. I think the CAA Quebec estimated that it would be about $20 billion that would be needed to bring them all up to good condition across the province of Quebec. So big budget there.
Good luck with that, Ainsley. It was great to have you on the show today. This was fun. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Leisha.
That's Ainsley McClellan. She is the host of Good Question Montreal, our sister podcast. You heard from Josh Paget in Calgary. He is the producer of This is Calgary. There are 7 local podcasts across the country produced by CBC. They are all worth checking out. They tackle local issues. And who knew that potholes was something we all had in common? Barry writes, I've been driving on 13th Avenue for decades, recently on my way to work, and I couldn't believe that there's a huge expansion joint that they fixed poorly just west of Elphinstone and 13th. When the people came out to put the white stripes on the crosswalk, they painted right over top of the expansion joint without fixing it first. I couldn't believe it. I think I have an idea. When there's 5 or 6 people sitting around fixing 1 or 2 potholes, let the other 3 people that are standing around cold patch it right there. Then at least they're all doing some work and we can lighten the load on everybody else so we don't have to put up with these things all throughout the year. That's from Barry. You can email us too, bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, to live in Saskatchewan is to experience rough roads, and as we have established, much of that can be chalked up to the harsh climate and the great variations in temperature we experience in this province. But when Alan Barilla drives down the road, he is seeing it with different eyes. He runs Morski Construction, a paving company that does lots of contract work for the provincial government. He's also a board member with the Saskatchewan Heavy Construction Association, and he joins us on the line right now near Prince Albert. Hello to you, Alan.
Good afternoon.
I think you're actually in your truck, right?
I am in my truck, yes.
Yeah. So you've been listening along. We've heard some examples from Calgary, from Montreal. A couple people have emailed with what they're seeing in Saskatchewan. How would you assess our roads in Saskatchewan? I'm curious.
You know what? I would say that everybody's point of view about the freeze-thaw cycles and the warm temperature, cold temperature, and the moisture is all correct. It makes it worse. Also, nothing was mentioned about traffic flow. We have more and more traffic flow, and the more tires that hit the holes, the faster it turns into a pothole. So that's traffic flow is a big thing too. The other thing that I think everybody forgets about too is most of these roads, especially in, I can only speak for Saskatchewan, were built a long time ago, like in the 50s and 60s. And when they built them, they didn't know what a Super Bee was, and they didn't know what 62,000 kilograms weights on trucks were and stuff like that. So they weren't built to a standard that we're trying to keep now. And like the gentleman earlier there from Montreal University, they to rebuild them correctly to fit our standards now is millions and millions and millions of dollars and road closures and lots of time to do it, right? So it's a real difficult thing now because they weren't, I'm not saying they weren't built properly when they were built. They just didn't know what to expect in the future. And now there's so many big loads and so much traffic volume that they were never designed for that.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Traffic volumes for sure. Big loads. So the larger the vehicle, I am thinking of big trucks. Do they have a greater impact on roads than a smaller vehicle?
Oh, absolutely. Just like they said, where you only have 10% big trucks and 90% small vehicles, the 10% does so much more damage than the small vehicles every day.
So tell us more about where you are right now, what you're working on, the kind of work that your company does. We can kind of establish how you've come to this perspective.
Yeah, what we're doing right now here south of Prince Albert is we're working on the 4-lane Highway 11 between Duck Lake and Prince Albert on the northbound, and we are doing two things here. One is we're filling in some ruts with microsurfacing, so the wheel paths that have rutted up from the heavy traffic or the volumes of traffic, so that when it rains like it has for this last week that we couldn't work, you hopefully will have less chance of hydroplaning. And then we're covering that all up with microsurfacing as well, right across both lanes as a wear surface. So the surface that is everybody can see today with this wear surface we're putting on top, it'll keep this surface from deteriorating anymore, just from Mother Nature mostly.
So maybe what exactly is microsurfacing? Like, what's the material that you're using to do that?
So it's a mixture of special sized rock and gravel and a special emulsion, a little bit of cement, and water. And it's all done with a chemical reaction. We lay it down and it has to evaporate to get hard, and it does a good job. And in a hurry, it's probably traffic ready in about an hour, and it goes on probably a ½ inch to an inch thick, and then it takes several years to wear that down to get back to the original pavement that you have now.
So several years to wear down. When would it make sense to repave? Like, I'm wondering how effective that microsurfacing is compared to repaving. I guess the cost would be substantially different.
Yeah, the cost is substantial. It's probably only a third the cost to pave it, or even less, maybe. So it's a maintenance. It's a maintenance thing. If you were to pave the 26 kilometers that we're working on here, it would probably be, as a guess, 20, 30 million. And for us, we get $100. It feels like $100.
I'm wondering how much technology has changed. It's really interesting hearing you talk about how these roads were built, many years ago. We didn't really know what to expect. They were, built well at the time, but then fast forward to today and they're not really built to our standards. So how much has technology changed in the last few decades as to how we might repair roads? Has that changed much?
It has to a certain extent. There's a lot of geotechnical devices that can be used, but it all comes down to the basics. In Saskatchewan here, we have lots of, our dirt is mostly gumbo, which means it expands lots when it gets wet and it shrinks lots when it dries. And it's not like that everywhere, but the biggest thing that can be done to new roads today is lots of sand on the bottom. So if you have lots of sand on the bottom, that lets the moisture drain out on the bottom. It kind of creates a cushion. And so back in the 50s on a 4-lane road, if they had them then, they would probably put a couple of feet of sand first before they put the rest of the structure, like base and asphalt. Where today, if you were to do a new road like that, you'd probably have 3 or 4 feet of that sand. And sand is kind of the second cheapest commodity we have in the province. First is dirt and second is sand, because it doesn't usually have to be manufactured. So that's the basics, is the more sand you have under the road, the better it is. But now to fight that is they can use some geotextiles, which is either cloth or grids that they could put on top of some of these roads and then build it up from there, and that would help stabilize it. So there's big rotor tillers that are called remixers that chew up the road and make it homogeneous, and so there's technologies like that, but everything comes with a cost.
Yeah, of course. I was laughing, but that Alan Carter from École de Technologie Supérieure in Montreal sure made me think. I know roads are so important to get goods to people, so I don't want to. I don't want to diminish that, but at the same time, it is interesting to think about how much we rely on vehicles, how many roads we have, and the cost to maintain them. And so when he mentioned something like gravel roads and how that technology has changed, and that low dust gravel roads, I'm just wondering what your reaction is to hearing something like that come up.
Well, since we are a contractor, we do some of that work, and we've taken paved roads and turned them back into gravel. And we've also had contracts to do certain roads where we couldn't, because all the farmers put all their equipment on the roads and blocked it and wouldn't allow us to work on the road and
Oh,
change
wow.
it to a gravel surface. And so people on they're used to having paved roads or oil treatment roads, and some of them do not want to go back to gravel. So just like you said, it would be a hard sell, but there is some roads that here in Saskatchewan they just don't have the money to maintain, and we do that kind of work as well as turning it back to gravel.
Do you expect things to become more difficult if we do start to see more erratic or more extreme fluctuations in the weather because of climate change? Is that on your radar at all?
That would make a difference. Like really, our winters, when we have a warmer winter, for me, I only recall about 2 weeks that was really cold. Uh, but when you start getting a thawing and some melting, and the traffic's pounding it in the winter, and then it gets cold again, and that, just like everybody's been talking on the phone, the results are seen in April and May and June, and that's what everybody's seeing right now across the country. And it's mostly, for what everybody's seeing right now across the country, is mostly because of the weather.
Because of the weather. We're going to introduce people to the mayor of the community that gets that dubious title of having the worst road in Saskatchewan. But before we introduce everyone to Larry Tomlinson, I want to know just about some of the worst roads that you've seen, Alan.
Well, you know what? I'm not sure which one the mayor of Moosomin is going to talk about, but last year we did this microsurfacing on Highway 1 from the Manitoba border right past Moosomin on the westbound lanes to Whitewood. And there's a highway just north of Moosomin that I drove 10 kilometers on, and I swore I would never drive on it again until it's fixed. And I was looking for a water source because we needed some water, and thankfully the town of Moosomin came to our rescue and allowed us to use a pond that they have that we use for our water source for doing that work. So if it's the same highway or the same road, I'm not sure because I haven't heard. I can attest to it being horrible, and I promised myself never to drive on it till it's fixed.
Okay, let's find out. Alan, don't go anywhere. I've got a few more questions for you, but I would like to say hello to Larry Tomlinson, Mayor of Moosomin, who's on the line right now. Mayor, hello. Welcome to Blue Sky.
Good afternoon.
So you took home the title of the worst road in Saskatchewan. People voted on this. You won. That road that Alan was talking about, is that the one you won for? Does that sound familiar to you?
That is the one, number 8, north from Moosomin to Rocanville.
So how would you describe it?
It's not something we're real proud of, but it does belong to the province, so it's terrible, actually.
How bad?
Well, it's like Alan said. Through the winter, it pocked up with heavy traffic, trucks from the mine, and the conditions that came with it for the winter, with the temperatures and everything else. And it was actually quite dangerous in places for the holes that were put into it. And it's a heavy traveled road.
Yeah, just how heavily traveled? You mentioned trucks coming from the mine.
Yeah, there's trucks from the mine. There's close to 900 employees that work at the potash mine that have to go over that road, and a lot of them live in this area. So it's morning and night back and forth. A lot of people from Rocanville, they all come here to doctor through our hospital and everything else, and they're all seniors. So it's heavy traffic, and it's only got worse. They're out doing a little bit of patching now, but according to the Minister of Highways, they'll do some patching this year, and it probably will get looked at trying to recap next year. So that's something at least to look forward to try and alleviate it.
Yeah, and so that is entirely the responsibility of the province. I am curious how much of your local budget goes into road repair. Your local budget wouldn't cover that, though.
No, it does not. Only in our town, and it's huge this year too. It's like Alan mentioned. We've got streets that have boiled up, frost boils that we haven't seen before. It's quite bad. Last year we didn't do a pilot paving because the contractor we get wasn't there. And we were doing $1 million worth of paving in town this year.
I'm assuming that's quite a lot for the town of Moosomin.
That is a huge amount for the town of Moosomin. That includes our paving of streets that we're repaving and recapping, and plus all the patching. But we have to dig them all out, and like Alan said, then we geotech it and A-base it, and it's a lot of work.
Wow. So getting back to that highway, though, that would be the responsibility of the province. I am wondering, if you do have a lot of industry with heavy equipment near Moosomin, should companies who contribute to more wear and tear on the roads than a typical vehicle be expected to pay extra, to help pay for the cost of repairing roads?
Well, it doesn't sound like that's going to happen. It's probably going to be the responsibility of just the government, from what I can understand.
How much do people talk to you about this? I'm wondering what you've been hearing from folks in town.
People are not very happy at all. It's well traveled, and everybody you talk to, that's one of the subjects they talk about, how bad it is and dangerous with the holes and how deep they are, and you can't dodge them all, and it's not good.
Yeah, have you heard of some accidents? I'm hoping not.
Apparently there was a couple that hit a hole. I know of one person that told me that they went into it and broke an axle on a vehicle, but it is a little bit better with the patching they've done, but it's still not great.
Your repair shop in town, I'm guessing they're pretty busy. If you've got that example, must be a pretty busy place.
I think we're past that now. I mean, they've got the worst ones patched, I think, but it's still not great.
Yeah. So getting that dubious title, though, does that come with any benefits? It's been recognized by your community, obviously. I'm assuming that they're the ones who voted that as the worst road in Saskatchewan. And so now that you've got that title, does that give you any leverage?
Well, I think it gave us enough leverage that they're looking at probably redoing it next year. So it probably moved it ahead a couple of years to get it repaved rather than leaving it for, at first conversations were up to 5 years away. So looks like now it's been maybe moved till next year through the Minister of Highways. So that's probably a good thing.
How will you keep up with the local budget? Just curious, especially as we've talked about how we might, continue to see extreme weather fluctuations in the years ahead. And so how will the community of Moosomin deal with that?
Well, we're pretty fortunate in one way. Our town is actually growing at a fairly good pace right now, and we're increasing our tax base somewhat. We did just finish our budget, and we did have to increase our budget by $1 million this year. So, and we're building a new water treatment plant, which is $13 million too. So it's a huge burden, but we're concentrating on doing roads as much as we can. We try to do a couple blocks a year for sure, plus everything else that comes with it.
Well, I appreciate you making some time for us today to tell us a little bit about it. Mayor Tomlinson, thank you.
Yep, thank you very much.
That is Larry Tomlinson, the mayor of Moosomin. We have with us today Alan Barilla. He runs Morsky Construction. He knows a lot about this stuff. So, Alan, you were right. That's the one. I am curious how the Department of Highways decides which roads to fix, because obviously they're contracting you, but you're not getting to decide where you go. And so, how is that decided?
So there's a couple of ways, and one of the big factors is traffic count. And so the more traffic on a road, the more priority it gets. But what happens is, at least in Saskatchewan here, the worse the road is, the more people go around it, and they take back roads and side roads and whatever grids that they can take to get to where they have to go. That is a much better thing. So as soon as everybody starts going off the road and taking the side roads, the traffic count goes way down. And so the reason people aren't driving on it is because it's so bad. And then the traffic count is down, and highways don't put it as a priority.
It also makes me think about northern Saskatchewan, where there maybe are fewer people, and how that might affect how those roads are prioritized. Do you see that too? If there just isn't the population, it doesn't get the attention?
Exact same thing, right? And so northern roads are a little bit more of a challenge just because of it is a little bit different. And there they will make some deals with, or sometimes do, where there's large corporations that are doing mining or whatever that will come forward and maybe share the costs with them and stuff like that. But yeah, traffic count is a big deal. And if the counts don't show the people there, they can't really spend the money there, or they, but the same thing happened down south on Highway 18, where the road was so bad nobody would drive on it, and they were just wearing out all the grid roads around it, and the RMs were unhappy. And now that they finally did spend the money and they made it a beautiful road, and now the traffic counts show the amount of people that are moving on there because people are driving on it again.
Interesting. We've got a caller on the line. Let's go to Lorraine in Prince Albert. Lorraine, hello. Welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi. This is a very interesting topic because it goes back to I worked for municipal roads. It was grid roads in Saskatchewan in the 70s. And I did soil testing to make sure the soil was the right type of mix for the road. Coming forward, my husband, we lived different places, moved back to Saskatchewan. My husband worked for Highways as checked on the highway patrol, the big trucks, and then he also worked for the highways in giving permits for the large vehicles, et cetera, on the roads. And that was about the time we took all the railroads out, which we couldn't see. Our roads are just getting hit so hard with the big trucks. Now, flash forward some more, my husband is drives freight from Saskatchewan down to California. So he sees all sorts of roads. California are really bad. He said going on the highway to Regina, Moose Jaw, whatever is that, he said he drives in the right lane because the left lane is so bad. He doesn't want to take the bumps and the shakes. So it's like he said, we see a brand new road resurfaced, and within a few weeks, you see the trenches from the big vehicles. They're just getting heavier. And isn't the tax we pay on fuel supposed to go to roads? Like, isn't that, and also that these big companies should be paying fees to cross our bridges, use our roads? I don't know.
Yeah,
it's just frustrating.
I think you just gave people a few additional things to think about, Lorraine. Thanks for calling. I appreciate it. It's Lorraine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, bye. It's Lorraine in Prince Albert. I'll share this quick email from Susan, who writes, I like the idea raised by the guest about not paving all roads. This was the guest in Montreal. In Regina, do all low-speed streets, 30 to 50K, need to be paved or parking lots? Why not try out the new gravel options on some of these? Could be easier and less money to fill in the potholes and fix the big pavement waves. Maybe better for big rain runoffs, too. Thanks for helping us put on our thinking caps on more economical and sustainable road repairs. As is, they don't seem to last very long. Well, Alan, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for being one of our guests today. Do you have 30 seconds? Do you want to share anything that you didn't get across yet? You've got quite a unique perspective on our roads.
I was just smiling that in small neighborhoods where there isn't much traffic. And like she said, on some of the small rural towns here, they are just gravel, right? And they live with it, and that's all they've had all their life. But in a big city like Saskatoon or Regina, I don't think that's going to fly, because you now have young couples with kids. They want to push baby strollers down the road. They want to have their kids rollerblade or skateboard, and you can't do that on gravel. And so that's the roadblock.
Yeah.
That's the roadblock.
It's a great way to end it, Alan. So good to talk to you today. Thank you.
Take care.
That is Alan Barilla. He runs Morski Construction in Regina. That company does contract highway repair for the provincial government. I'm Leisha Grabinski. This is Blue Sky. On our next show, we're talking about how it's grad season, and we'll meet some grade 12s who had quite the journey through high school. Remember, their high school education started during COVID. So that's tomorrow on Blue Sky. Have a great afternoon.